Are real-time strategy games dead? Are they a genre that your friends and their high blood pressure medication have decided to abandon years ago? Or is there a chance that real-time strategy will become, once again, one of the major or most popular genres in gaming? Your conventional Twitch chat wisdom would, of course, as it has been for 6-7 years of StarCraft II in one form or another, is no, of course not. Well, Frost Giant Studios raised $4.7 million for real-time strategy game revival, which is a very direct and maybe optimistic way to put it, depending on who you are. And if you're coming from the basic description video, which was all too long, well, I hope this one can be at least 2-3 times longer. But who doesn't? So Blizzard veterans, including... we'll just list it off. The video doesn't actually have, like, bullet points with their resume on them, though I think it should, because every article has to list it anyways. But founded by Tim Campbell and Tim Morten. Tim Campbell, the lead campaign designer for Warcraft 3, who also worked on Red Alert 2, Command & Conquer Generals. So, the first generation of real, like, 3D RTS games. And then Tim Morten, who was the game designer and production director of Starcraft II Legacy of the Void, which, I mean, was pretty good, have teamed up alongside other former Blizzard employees, ranging from Kevin Dong, the lead co-op designer, to Carol LaForge, an esports expert and administrative expert as their business administrator. I don't, like, all of these words sound like made-up words. But she does the businesses. Also, she's the mother of Day 9 and Tasteless. And if you haven't watched Day 9 Daily 100, yeah, that one. And if you have. And if you haven't, go watch that and then finish this video. I keep scrolling through like I'm going to reference it. But they've raised the money, and I told you I'd talk a lot more about it. We've already been over how it's going to be a PC game. And RTS. That's why they're here. They're not here to make the most popular game of all time. They're not here to make the most money, but obviously they're here to make money. The point is to prove that real-time strategy can be popular, it can make money. You just got to do it the right way. And essentially everyone both investing and working on the project, from Bitcraft Ventures and Riot Games, to the members of the small team at the moment, think that they are making... It's not going to be StarCraft 3. It's not going to be Warcraft 4. They've all but outright said Blizzard has no plans of either, like in some fantasy land, releasing the IP, intellectual property of those, not genres. I'm blanking on the word for it, but those series... Still not right, but that's not happening. What is happening is a pretty much a rethinking, or at least rebuilding RTS. Not abandoning anything we learned from the last 20-25 years, but instead modernizing it and expanding it as for a game that is more accessible. So, the businesses. Yes, the businesses. How do I know this, for one? And I will be having an interview with Frost Giant Studios. You can see interviews in other places as well. But I've talked with them at length before this announcement, and they've made efforts. Not like, I'm not small potato. I'm like medium-sized potatoes, but they've been talking from anyone from Serral, Fear Dragon, Day 9. I'm sure plenty, like anybody in the Warcraft 3 scene, probably Grubby. I don't know for sure all of these people, but most of them have released some form of content with it already. But they've gone out of their way to start on the right foot and talk with people who are heavily invested and interested in real-time strategy games. And right now it is kind of a passion project to play RTS games. Like, everybody played StarCraft II when it was popular, but when something flashy, when something easier, when something less, like, high pressure came along, like League of Legends, Dota 2, you might be like, Winter, having a social interaction with other people is the most anxiety-inducing thing I could do. You said people, not Dota players. But I digress. You get what I'm saying with this. And StarCraft kind of branded itself as, this game is so hard, only real hardcore players play it. Like the most competitive 1v1 esport. Well, let's go back to that. 1v1. For the history, I feel like I have to circle back again. We're on the drawing board right now. Do not expect, like, we are starting, and by we, of course, Frost Giant, and by extension, all the people that they're plan on working with and have already worked with, and their audiences and the people they get feedback from. They've said, well, from my meeting, the impression I got was all the stuff that I brought up. I told you guys, I brought a lot of criticisms of the current ways that StarCraft II is being marketed, the ways it tried to retain players, like what kind of, like, some games will use daily quests, or, well, before free-to-play stuff like that. I brought a lot of criticism, but with this winning smile, they couldn't help but turn me down, essentially. Or really, as Tim would say, they'll explore what's realistic and see where to focus their priorities in the future, which is the way to say, yeah, we don't have money, nor can we get approval for this. There's no disapproval now. The impression I got was all that stuff that I said at the time, and many others, I'm not taking nearly any serious fraction of credit. Like pro players, commentators, anyone, like you name them, they probably at least reached out. But all those criticisms that they couldn't act on before, maybe there's an opportunity now. The intent of the game, which is not even a pre-alpha yet, but the intent is to build a game that is an RTS, and is a true RTS, is not like a MOBA in disguise, that is accessible with co-op elements. So that's one of the most successful parts. Co-op is still continues, maybe not successful enough for Activision Blizzard, but the most obviously like monetary financial part of StarCraft II. On top of the fact it was actually just played more than multiplayer, and continues to be, to my knowledge, to this day. At least it was last year and every year before it. Literally more people play co-op than play any version of multiplayer. But so that is actually a focus. Like Kevin Dong, who was lead co-op designer on StarCraft II, apparently his title is lead co-op designer at Frost Giant Studios. So that is that is going to be a significant part, and single player as well with the Warcraft III campaign designer is the intent. So having a Protoss, I'm sorry, I said PvE in my head, and then I skipped that, and I was like, I should spell it out. And then it was like Protoss, so not that, not Protoss, distinctly not Protoss, completely different name, nothing even close to Protoss will likely, even if it has the same, not Protoss, PvE and PvP. The intent is to have a compelling single player or co-op element, and also a competitive esport. Not just like, well, it's fun to play with your friends and like they're public. No. Esports. StarCraft II, Warcraft 3, Brood War, that kind of esports. Now, minimum, remember, several years before we even get a real idea of what that looks like. It takes a little bit to make a game, and it takes longer to make it right, even in the early access era. So, that's why I keep going back to, we're on the drawing board. We're not like taking StarCraft and moving some pieces around and changing a few numbers and updating or downgrading the graphics depending on how much you love Brood War. That's not what we're doing. We're thinking about what makes RTS, what would make a good esport, but is still obviously a competitive RTS. And this was my original, like, I wasn't really expecting to have the conversation, but this was my thought process, is like, it's got to be a team game. I know immediately, like, let's think about having people play long-term, on top of co-op, no, competitively, a team game. I'm looking to see how much of an instant rejection, I feel like an instant rejection, this gets from your average Starcraft or RTS fan. But when I think about, like, I play Rocket League a lot. I play other esports. I watch other esports. I just, right now, as it stands, I don't think it's so much that it's, like, I don't think StarCraft suffers as much because it's an RTS, but so much there's just an intentionally lack of social experience. Like, why do you think Seral's so good? In Finland, there's like 12 other people, so, and no sunlight. So you have no choice but to stay inside, socially isolated. He was trained. He was built for that. But the average person, according to evolution, not so much. Just not being like a game that intentionally either pits you against or separates you from what some. Now, this is something that other people have, guys. Friends. A game that does that is kind of destined to suffer with a casual audience, and that's partially for StarCraft. Like, co-op is popular for that reason, but like, people still want to play a competitive game even if they're not that good. I just feel StarCraft doesn't have the level of reward. Like if you've got 2-3 hours to play at the end of the day. Like, you go to work, you come home, or you go to work from home, and then you're done with work. Like, you're probably not going to want to throw on a 1v1 game if your friends are on or something, right? Like, even I don't do that when I'm done with whatever you call this I do. So I think a competitive team game, like, my instant instinct was 3v3. Like, 3 players per team. And this is what I came up with when kind of on the spot, like, just thinking about what makes an RTS and what would be realistic. Honestly, I kind of thought of, like, Direct Strike Commanders. Like, a game balanced around 3v3 where, like, there are strengths and weaknesses of different factions or commanders or races or classes or what have you. But they work with each other in certain ways. Or there is no difference. Like, more of a Rocket League route of everyone's the same and it comes down to exactly how you execute it. But I think it would land a little bit closer to, like, a Direct Strike Commanders in this vision. Where if your friend maybe isn't, like, as quick, or if they're more of a Turtle Terran type of player, there's a place for, like, they have a role. Whereas you have your, like, high APM micro players have something that they can play. And then you have your, like, well, whatever you guys are doing, I'll fill it in. Like, and now you kind of have roles you can work towards. And this is leaning a little more towards a MOBA. But I think in StarCraft II and team games, if team games were balanced around team games, like if, say, 2v2, you had a 150 supply cap, but, I don't know, like, the Zerg had some of their unit stats adjusted and you could build on creep. Because Zerg does suffer in team games at, like, max supply because the strength of, like, 200 supply of carriers and 200 supply of tanks is hard to match. But that is an example of it. Like, but if there was any effort put into it, if, like, 2v2 in StarCraft II was essentially the same with just some slight adjustments on top of having decent maps, which there aren't too many people motivated to build. Like, it does feel like it's close to as competitive as is, and if there were some slight, like, relatively small adjustments, still very large in the scheme of StarCraft, but, like, it could be just as, if not more, competitive. So, but that was my instinct. What do you think? I'm actually going to open it up to the Twitch chat, and maybe I'll make, like, a YouTube reaction, because in talking with Frost Giant, which they plan on continuing to have conversations with people like myself and like as many people who are in RTS esports and just RTS in general as possible. The expectation is not like I will provide feedback, but, like, I take what you guys say and I'm sure you can say it in many other places. But like, I take what you guys say and I run it through whatever filter we have up here that arguably exists, and I come out with maybe something different than I originally thought, or maybe there are different ideas that I can pass along, because the intent of Frost Giant is to work directly and actively with the RTS community. Like, that comes off as like, it feels like a joke a little bit. Like, that's something you say, right? But that's kind of because we're used to Blizzard RTS. Blizzard, very polished, very professional. There's a lot of steps from point A to point B in getting things, like, and there's a reason for that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But this is not that. This is from the ground up. And this is the ground floor, and it takes a while to build that foundation, but there is a much better chance and much better likelihood of actually taking feedback. So, like, when I hear that, it really is my instant reaction, like, you're gonna Battle.net forums, okay, like, yeah, just like in the past when Zerg won for 2 years and you but Maru, and so on and so forth. But so that is why I'm saying all this, because I'm kind of explaining my thought process. It's a whole conversationalist thing. But I think a modern RTS esport would be a team game. It would probably, like, we're assuming it's an RTS, it's a PC RTS. You're going to have units, control groups. Some units will counter others. They'll probably be like ground and air. I don't know, maybe if there's some other level. I mean, I guess burrow is kind of like ships and stuff. Yeah, we'll let the chat go. But how much would it be focused on micro or macro elements? Like, how much of it? I haven't thought about this really. I guess I'll think out loud. But like in Brood War, balance is achieved somewhat because the game is too hard even for the best players, except maybe Flash. But like, you look at any player, like a top player in Brood War, even Flash, will have like, because SCVs, you build them from your command center, and for some reason they're too stupid to figure out where the minerals are, so you have to build them, and then you have to select them and be like, those are the minerals. They're like, I don't think so. And then you're like, no, for realsies. And that's obviously we've developed past that technologically. And then Starcraft II is more balanced around the power of certain unit compositions and the supply cap. Like, if you saw Maru with 4 idle SCVs at 3 different command centers, you'd be like, excuse me, Maru, how did the game go this far? Why didn't you proxy racks? And also, what are you doing? Is he AFK? And like, what parts of an RTS, like, is the skill mechanical, and what parts are strategy? Like, how much RT and how much S? I personally really favor more of the RT, the real time. Like, I actually think Brood War is super interesting because both players are just struggling to fight the game enough to fight each other. It's like every over-the-top movie action sequence where, well, now they're on the train and it's raining lava. Like, oh my god. And also they're shooting at each other, but mostly lava. That's what Brood War kind of feels like. But of course, strategy games like you'll think of, I will talk about, to throw under a slight bus, Iron Harvest, which I played, like, is probably the newest, most recent, like, big name RTS release. Honestly, I played it for 4, 5, 6 hours. I was trying to find, like, it feels like a fun story, cool concept. It feels like it just feels worse to play than StarCraft II. It comes out in 2020. StarCraft II came out in 2010. It just feels, and honestly looks worse in a lot of scenarios. But it's been pointed out, like, some people really like the longer, the more, I guess, more of a Warcraft 3 style. Like, everything's micro, not that much macro. I'm not a Warcraft 3 expert. I've watched some, I've played some, and I understand it's much more about, like, which unit is doing what than StarCraft 2 or Brood War. But I really, like, personally, like the Brood War style of we're just throwing armies into the front like it's Stalingrad or something, and until somebody breaks, while desperately trying to keep up with everything else. But also, of course, with plenty of opportunities for like strategy and mind games and micro. So, I think what elements make an RTS? Okay, talk out loud. You got macro management, micromanagement. You have, like, in basic parts that I guess you could describe are control groups, counters, and mechanics. Mechanics/terrain. Environmental mechanics, I guess. So what I mean by that is like ground, air, maybe water units, depending on the game. And then like high ground versus low ground. How much does a map with a terrain work into how the game is played as well? That's actually like in League of Legends, there's one map. It gets switched around a little, but everyone, like, you don't pick and ban certain maps. That's a big part of Starcraft II and Brood War. Is no, this map's good for the way I play, or what race I am, or a combination of both. And this map isn't. Like, and sometimes that's very pronounced. And sometimes the chat, no, Twitch chat just isn't saying anything. They have no opinions on RTS. Yeah, let me refresh it. Otherwise, I want to be in the video, Winter. I'm watching live. It's 4 a.m. No, it's 2 a.m. unless you're European, in which case it's good morning. Well, technically for everyone. Why are you a vampire? Have you seen me? I don't. So, this is one of those where I don't have an answer or like a coherent point because there's not going to be one. But my initial thoughts are like a 3v3 game. Oh yeah, another one is RTS has some of the most dynamic game lengths. Thank you for pointing that out. Tease or X-Itch as well in that conversation. But how long does a game take? I honestly think it's and how many games in like an esports series? Like a best of 5, best of 7, best of 3. Best of 1 is hard to sell in RTS, but almost no esport is accepting that. But I think a game that is less dynamic. I really like the dynamic aspects of Starcraft and Warcraft. Starcraft especially, where a game could be 3 minutes or it could be 38 or longer. But you have no idea whether it's going to be 3 minutes or 38 minutes. There's almost no other esport that has such a range. I guess MOBA games have a longer range than like Rocket League, but most games have a much narrower window of how long a game is going to take. And I think that's part of the reason, combined with 1v1, why people get so much anxiety. Because you press that play button, and your blood pressure spikes. And if you survive that, you get to wait through a 5 second to 50 second queue. And then you have to think about, am I committing the next 5 minutes of my life or the next 50? And so I think in terms of making a game accessible, just literally being able to plan that a game won't take more than X amount of time, most of the time, is kind of important. Like that makes a game where you jump in, you jump out, you can play casually. That's what we're talking. Like that's the intent. The intent is not to make an even more hardcore, incredibly like only Italian teenagers with carpal tunnel coming around the corner are able to actually play this game well. Like maybe that's what people want, but I think it's been borne out at this point that having a game that requires 400 APM to be professional is probably a little more than, like, and then how do you make it balanced or appealing to casual players, lower level players, that will still want to play competitive, but aren't going to be as hardcore about it, without it, like, because honestly, I'm a little sarcastic about it, but I think Protoss is pretty imba against bad players. Like, Protoss in StarCraft II is an example. where a lot of players just hate Protoss because they have the most cheesy bullshit. They have the most stuff that just kind of kills you. And in bad players, I mean myself, all the way down to the lower thousands of MMR. Like, because there's just so much stuff that's like, haha, you're dead. Whereas not so much Terran or Zerg have that in SE2. But Protoss is actually right now the weakest race at the highest level. In terms of professional games and tournaments won, pretty consistently over the past few years, Protoss has been objectively weaker than the other races. So, like, you have a difference in between the experience of your Gold Leaguer to your experience of your stats, who's desperately trying to come up with 5-6 different build orders, where the Zerg player does the same thing for the first 5 minutes every game. Is that because Cyril plays Zerg and that and Raynor plays Zerg because he's amazing? Or if Cyril had chosen to play Protoss, would he be equally as amazing? There's no answer to that. I tend to believe the people who are inclined to play Zerg and understand it well get more consistent results than those who play Protoss. Because of the way the game is designed, not necessarily because Cyril's the biggest genius in the world, though he may be. He's up there. All right, who else is going to pull off a fedora under the age of 60? That's the epitome of genius, milady. But how much of that is relevant? Like, when you have an RTS game, like, should someone be able to pick it up? Should you and your two friends, who are now 3 times the age they were when Brood War came out, should you be able to pick it up and do reasonably well if you have good coordination? Or should you just get dunked on by 500 APM players? There's no answer there. I tend towards the dunked on, but I'm gonna play. New RTS comes out, I'm gonna play it. We're not talking to me. I'm not talking to the person who only quit World of Warcraft because he got into a more hardcore game when his World of Warcraft arena partners got into Starcraft, and then we played for like 2 days, and they went back to World of Warcraft, and I saved a lot of money. So, quit WoW today while you still can. Did we eventually find that WoW killer? Maybe. Frost Giant Craft will be that WoW killer. But maybe instead of dwelling in the Shadowlands. But so what I'm trying to say is I'm not the person you need to appeal to necessarily. But it's very important to have me as well. Like, you want the people who are passionate. Like, I think. And this is possibly, this is a little self-interested, to say the least, and a little douchey. But I think the people who are most committed to RTS games and the people who in the past have commentated, content creators, influencers, are some of the most well-spoken in esports, partially because they're just older on average, but understand how to create interest for a game they're legitimately passionate about as well. But also part of that comes from the current RTS demographic. Yes, my 32-year-old friend. And most gamers are not 32. Well, at least not the most popular ones. So we're partially talking as... I know some of you are youngins out there. I hope you guys are staying on fleek with the illustrates. Deadass. So, with that said, but you, my friends, my homies, it's time to stop. If you like this video, I will stop saying whatever it is I just said. And also, what would get you to play an RTS? I do think, like, if you have teammates to blame, that's part of it. I do think I'm pretty committed. I know there's a lot on either side of this fence right now. I think a lot of people understand that team games just have a wider audience. They always will. This goes to sports ball and related things as well. Like tennis, golf, those are big, okay? But they're not football, and I'm not talking about freedom or non-freedom football. They're just not football. Like, the best players in football get a lot of notoriety. Like, those are, like, everyone knows the best football players. No matter which ocean is on which side. And that's, like, there are no 1v1. I don't know what the biggest. Golf would probably be. So, by the way, Cyril has a golf tournament named after him, in case you missed that. You can see him with a fedora on the poster. It's like an official, like, Finnish golf tournament. Just unrelated, but of course he does. Like, like tennis is significant as well, but it's just not really, in my opinion. I might be no. There's no way tennis is as big as football. It's just not. U.S. or outside of it. It's big. It's strong, but like, it's strong. Tennis, very strong sport. Okay, it's in my top 25. All right, but I do think in order to appeal to a wider amount of people without losing most of what makes RTS, in fact, maybe adding on to it, I think it should be a team game. I could be easily convinced otherwise, but as it, like, my first impression of if I was to make an RTS now and try to appeal to the most people while still being competitive, it would probably be like, maybe not 5v5, but it would be a team game. And I don't think that necessarily takes anything away from RTS, but that's my opinion. And now this is me putting on my casual snapback. It's a dangerous maneuver. It's dead, just like RTS. Jimmy! Well, that's exactly what I expected to happen. Why do you have a wireless mouse but not wireless headphones? This is a good point. To put on my casual snapback for a moment. So we're gonna we'll edit it out. I can't do this. But if I was to do this, to put on, no. All right. To do that though, but to get that, I might have my opinions, but to get that demographic of players, which is what I imagine from experience to be most FPS games, more console than, you know what I mean, but like to get a larger demographic of players, and not just like get in here because it's a good, like, to have them understand RTS, like modern RTS. I think micro is everything. I think people have too short of attention spans to appreciate the macro gods of Brood War. And seeing, instead will be like, look at that disruptor hit, and ignore the 5 that missed. And then they died to Marauders. Like, but I think a game that's more, like, closer to Warcraft 3, a game that's more focused, not on hero units necessarily. I'm not actually a big fan of hero units. I kind of like the idea of hero abilities. Like the top bar abilities in co-op, maybe something closer to that. But maybe not so much hero I guess units in StarCraft, the mothership is literally heroic, but not necessarily like one unit and its 5 buddies, but more focus on executing a strategy well rather than necessarily funding it. But that's kind of what the company is all about in the first place. So, optimal number of faction characters and units in a game, especially with a team game. Like, if I was to adjust team games, like say I wanted to make StarCraft II 3v3 competitive. Like, if I wanted to balance it, I'd lower the supply cap, just 1 for performance reasons, and 2 for balance reasons. I'd have a 200 supply for Zerg, 175 for Terran, and like 160 for Protoss. But I'd also adjust it. Like the macro mechanics. So the macro mechanics, like say Chrono Boost. What if you could Chrono Boost your teammates' buildings? Maybe the percentages are adjusted. Chrono Boost for Protoss, super powerful, helps your teammates get their strategies done quicker. You can now build on Zerg creep, and it makes your units move faster. So creep spread becomes a team effort, and maybe the Zerg, while it could build a lot of units, like helps out its teammates. And then Terran just increases everyone's money. Instead of having to manually trade it, like Terran usually has more income via mules, Terran just passively gives people more income. Maybe you can like spec into it with another engineering bay upgrade. But with a little bit of focus on teams like that, and a little bit of balancing out the power of the races in team games, because they're just kind of imbalanced. Zerg is just, like, you can't have a team of 3 Zergs, but you can definitely have a team of 3 Protoss in 3v3, as it stands. Just an example. So there would have to be adjustments needed if you were in a real competitive environment. So, like, that's we're not rebuilding StarCraft, by the way. That's not the intent. Though I'm sure an end result that was better than StarCraft would have a lot of... Oh my god. I can't believe that happened. Like, that's never happened. Not in many months. Wow. I'm going all out for this video. Dead ass. But let me put on my casual cap and take off my pro gamer headphones for a moment. Let me get my earpods. AirPods? AirPods. Yeah. Well, they are But, and now here's another question. Can you make a game, can you make a competitive game that isn't free to play? So this is an entirely another part of it. Like, is anyone going to buy a competitive game in 2020? Like, is a significant number of people going to? Now, imagine a single player campaign. I do actually, I like the format that StarCraft II has now. Rocket League was the last holdout. Rocket League went free-to-play. I think, well, Rocket League went from one of the biggest games, like one of the top 10 on Steam, to free-to-play, and now it is in, like, the top 5 games of the world. It has over 1 million players most days. Not, like, just overall, but most days it has over 1 million players at prime time. So, kind of proving that free-to-play, even on cheap games, is the way to go. But I like... Is Overwatch free-to-play? I was talking about, like, top-tier esports. But, I like the StarCraft II format. Free-to-play for multiplayer and a little bit of co-op. No, but, like, we'll go into that a little. Blizzard is putting a lot of money into Overwatch League, which means it probably comes from other places a little, and redirects priorities. And Overwatch has gone from an impossible-to-watch esport on a game that's like a much flashier MOBA. It's gone, like, I just couldn't watch an entire match. I was interested in some of the matches, like, closer to when Overwatch League started. It's gone from that to the observer interface now makes it palatable in short amounts. But I watch Counter-Strike. I watch Rocket League, which is a fast game as well. I watch StarCraft, of course. I don't like. Do people legitimately like watch Overwatch, like, for hours at a time without? And I know I've played it. I at one point was ranked, like, not very high, but it's very hard to really tell what's going on in Overwatch. Like, Overwatch, I think, missed the mark on a whole lot of competitive aspects. Like, I mean, I'm probably asking the wrong audience, but I think it's fun to play. It's like the opposite of Starcraft, where it's fun to play. I think it's fun to play, especially with friends, right? But it's kind of terrible to watch as an esport. Whereas Starcraft is just an exercise in frustration and incompetence. But that 19-year-old Italian over there, though, that's pretty fun. I gotta. So you wanna go more towards that spectating environment. Like, and remember, on the UI team, they have Ryan Schutter, who designed the game hard overlay and a lot of the like professional overlays. I think there's a lot of opportunity to not just take, like, you can take the kind of easy to tell what's happening. Like, StarCraft is one of the easiest games to kind of get the gist of, not the details, but you can see like, oh, those guys blew up. That's probably bad. No, it's actually not, because now he's going to build battle crew. Okay, like, you know what I mean, though. And there's a number. You can take that kind of spectator environment. I think you can really modernize it with, like, a new engine. So part of the reason the way StarCraft replays work is really efficient. There's a reason the replays are only, like, kilobytes. Because it doesn't take a video of the game. It's a series of... This is my understanding as a... I'm not a technical expert, but... just let me put on my cap for a moment. But it reads a series of text. So the game essentially replays the game from a record of the game. It's not showing you a video of it. It's replaying the game in the game when you watch replays with essentially perfect recreation. But that's why you have to load, like, you have to speed through the whole replay to get to the end, because you can't just skip, because it has to play through it all in the engine. One of the big failings, and one of the things that in StarCraft II they wanted to do that never ended up materializing, is being able to, like, the in-game tournaments? These in-game tournaments that nobody plays because there was never any updates since Legacy of the Void came out. They wanted you to be able to drop in, drop out, watch your friends play. Or maybe if there was like an unranked match, maybe join your friends or something. But the infrastructure was just, like, remember, StarCraft II was originally designed in, like, before 2010, like, decades ago. Okay, like... decades ago. So, the technology was not as advanced. Nowadays, I think you can have, like, if you're making an RTS now, you should be able to go into your friend's game. Maybe there's a mode where you can actually, like, be a spectator, but either help or, like, some Archon mode that didn't make you want to end the relationship you have with that person. Like, that's on the table. I don't know how hard that would be to implement. I don't want to... Like, we're thinking really big right now is what we're doing, and then I'm sure it'll get toned down in a certain direction. But, like, being able to have a mode where it's essentially, like... Instead of Archon mode, it's more like Batman and Robin mode, where, like, you have Batman who macros and micros, and then you have Robin who whines the whole time and has, like, 2 special abilities. So I gotta... Something like that. Like a competitive co-op, but... I wouldn't imagine that to be, like, a real RTS. I'm still, like... I like the 3v3. But with more focus on micro than macro. Though still macro is a very important part in economic management. I don't know. What are we going to call them? Like, I like games. Shapes.io. Alright? For those of you who know how much time that game has taken, stop lying to yourself. It's been twice as much. But Shapes.io. So there's all these factory games where it's like you got to get the minerals so you can get the iron, so you can get the coal, so you can get the gold, and then you can get the coppers, and then you build that. Shapes.io just takes that, and it's like, here, get the circles, get the squares. Then you can make rectangles, you can make half circles. We've just dispelled with any pretense of pretending this is... It's like when Battle Royale, it's like, the gas is closing in, and then Apex Legends is like, there's the circle, or like new Battle Royales are like, that's the circle of death. Be in the circle of life. Like, we just kind of pared it down to, these are the mechanics, everyone knows it. Like, so what this is leading to is I don't know if it'd work, because like there's going to be a single player campaign, there's going to be flavor, there's going to be story. It's not Starcraft 3 or Warcraft 4, to be clear, but that's the intent. So this won't happen. But I'd like if they just called it, like, I don't know, like, I can't even come up with anything. You got like silver and gold. Oh, that's not even a good example. Like, you have blue and you have green. And blue is used for your basic stuff, and then your green, it's just called green. There's nothing else. It's not some fancy word, it's just green. Or, I don't know, are there... You see, most RTS games, how many resources are there? Oh my god, this is going to be like a 3-hour-long video. So, I'm actually going to... Oh my god. I said this was going to be the longer video. How many resources are there going to be? What is supply? I'm thinking about a lot of stuff in no direction, which was kind of the point. But as time goes along, I'll probably do some more focused soul searching and comment searching and just brainstorming and all that. It's over. I've solved how to make it anime. Carbot already did that. Alright, Carbot did it. You're late. And he nailed it. Well, why do you think they hired him for the logo? Anyways. There's so much to think about. So, I'm just going to tell you now, it's going to get more rambly past this point. But this is the You're Here to Listen to Me Ramble video. So, if you made it this far on the stream, well, now we're here. So, like, supply should be called forces. Gas should be called tech. Supply... Wait, no. You can't... No. You can't. You can't change what supply is. You might... Like, you can't change the word for supply into a resource. You're just not going to do that. I don't care if we're trying to, like, make it more accurate. You're not going to call minerals supply. You're not going to do that. If you do that, it's the stupidest thing I've ever goddamn heard. Not because it's wrong, but because never. That's not how... Like, it's not StarCraft 3, but StarCraft exists. No. That is a emphatic N with an O in bold, impact, black outline font. Supply... No. I don't... Oh my god. Like, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's a big deal what it's called, because people are gonna call it minerals and gas, or like every once in a while still call it food, whatever amount. But now it got me thinking about how many resources. I kind of like the idea, and I think it opens up more options. 3 resources. I really like the games that have resources that are destroyable as well. Like, this something I think. Like, because it'd be very hard to balance in StarCraft II, the way it stands. But what if, like, there were trees, or terrazine trees, or terrazine crystals, but you could shoot at them and destroy them? Like, that would add a whole nother part of strategy. Like, do you destroy it? Do you try to mine it yourself? Stuff like that. Like, whatever that is. Like, mechanics around that I think are really cool. And that's, like, and that creates plays in and of itself. It's like a much more advanced versions of, like, destructible rocks. Every once in a while, somebody will bring down a set of rocks right on someone. Well, there's not too many maps with the, like, rock towers now, but... And, crazy environment play. No, I kind of like that. But yeah, like a resource that could either be destroyed or acquired, as opposed to just acquired or denied to being acquired, which is, wow, that's some incredible words. Denied to it, either you're mining it or you're trying to stop them. But yeah, like trees destroyed or something like that. And then maybe you have, I'm gonna go ahead, like, I don't think you want more than 2 factions. I know it adds a lot of flavor, but I think you have red and blue. Or you have, like, I don't know. You have, why? This is the easiest part. Why am I, like, you have, like, earth and sky. One is more focused on, like, mobile air or maneuverable units that kind of circumvent environmental hazards. And then you have earth, which is, like, a more turtly, tanky, but like overall stronger. Like, and then you have maybe some different paths obviously from there. I think if you're gonna do a team game, I think there should be some sort of, like, you pick, this guy plays earth and this guy plays sky. I think there should be something at the start you pick, and that's like what you play, even if there aren't as many as the other RTS game. But I think, like, it's very hard. It's already hard enough to balance just one and all its potential tech paths and all that. Other games don't have really this issue of, like, there's so many strategies that one race can do, and then everything in one of the hardest parts of Starcraft II. Like, for example, in Starcraft II, the Void Ray was recently buffed, has lower build time, moves faster, costs less. Good buffs. And this was because right now, and months ago, and continuing, in Protoss versus Zerg, this is what was quoted to be the issue. Protoss versus Zerg, Protoss doesn't really have a reliable way to get into the mid game without being behind economically. So the Void Ray was buffed to fill that niche. It's okay. It's okay at that. It makes it better at that. But what it really did was, maybe for the 5% of games, it made it easier for Protoss to get to the mid game. It added, for every one of those games, there's 3 proxy Stargate Void Ray builds in Protoss versus Terran, which, while they can be stopped, are just way more frustrating to deal with, because they can get Void Rays quicker, and they move more quickly. So just like this build, which wasn't really a thing, buffed for Protoss versus Zerg, is now, like, completely changing. Maybe not imbalanced, but the intent was not to significantly change Terran versus Protoss. The intent was to help Protoss versus Zerg. And of course, that didn't have quite the intended effect. And that's, like, that happened. But I think, the more I think about it, if you want to make a competitive RTS, like, in the 2020s, I'm leaning more towards, like, these are my very first impressions. Like, I learned of this not too many days before all you guys did. I haven't had much time to be like, if I made an RTS game, like, I've been, kind of my thought process for many years has been, well, if Starcraft III ever becomes anything but a pipe dream, what would I adjust? Like, how would it change? But now it's really like, what makes an RTS, what's important, and what is something that isn't required. Like what can we change and improve, or create? This I didn't expect. Like, that has been, I'm sure, essentially everyone here, everyone watching right now or on YouTube has at some point been like, what if they did this? What, like, the obvious ones are, what if there's a 4th race, or the supply limit has changed, or something that there are 400 arcade mods for. But, so, I know everyone has an opinion. There's but literally maybe your border collie right there doesn't have a strong opinion, but it's still Gold League at Protoss. Am I right? But the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking about 2 factions, 2 sides. Like, I'm going with Earth and Sky. Maybe if you added more, be like air and water, Or fire, maybe. Fire would work. Or maybe sky covers air. So you have earth, you have fire, you got water, and then air, of course. Who knows, right? Like, yes. Earth, wind, and fire. And now here's another one. Like, what if there was like, I make jokes about this. Mono Battle has it. What if there's like a pick ban? What if there's just a set of units, and at the start of the game, you get to pick 6 of them. You get 6 units you get to pick out of 15. And you trade off with your opponent who also picks 6. Now, you think about an SC2, that doesn't work, obviously, even in mirror matchups. But what if there were units that were a lot closer aligned? Like, the reason the Herc wasn't added. The Herc, the grappling hook, you see him in Tychus as a version, was because he overlapped too much with Hellbats and Marauders. It was essentially like overlapping the Hellbat entirely and kind of replaced the Marauder. So it just didn't have a role. But what if you have the Marauder, the Hellbat, and the Herc, all like kind of tanky, single target, or not single target, but like kind of tanky, 2 supply, relatively the same cost units. And now you're in a situation where if I'm gonna pick a Marauder, I know it's good against Hellbats. But my next pick, do I decide to pick the Marauder and then ban the Hellbat? Or do I pick the Herc, which is the safer choice, and then use my ban on some other type of tech? Like maybe like Thor's or something for the later game. Like, I'm just thinking, like, that's still strategy, but how much of the game, honestly, sounds very interesting. But, like, every time I watch a MOBA game, I think there was a time I was into Dota, bless my heart, where I actually found the draft interesting. The like, seemingly 30 minutes, even though I know it's more like 8, where they actually pick the heroes and the champions or whatever. I was really into that. But whenever I was just wanted to get to the match, I'd be like, oh my god, okay, whatever, just move on. So, and also that's another like level of, do you want to have that as a mechanic? Maybe that's a fun game mode. I don't think that would, it's a cool idea, but I'm already kind of like sidelining it as an RTS mechanic. It is interesting, but it does remind me more of a MOBA than like an RTS mechanic. What I'd like is, say you have Earth and Sky, and then there's a common pool of units they can both have. Maybe they both have types of workers or whatever. I think what's very important in RTS, like, Starcraft II is much more like a poker game. Why do you think so many people come from and go to and love poker? But, where you're showing as much of your hand as you want your opponent to see, or you're kind of gambling sometimes. Like, for example, when you scout the wall, like you scout the wall of a Terran player with like an Adept or something, and you see they have a reactored factory. Well, there's a chance that he has another factory. There's a chance he has a starport. He might just have like 4 barracks. Now, not all of those. Just ignore the fact that some of those are kind of silly builds, and just, you get the idea. I think that's a super important part. Like, the mind games within mind games, like some of the high-level fakes, like faking that you're starting Banshee Cloak, or at least starting an upgrade, and it has a little visual animation, and then canceling the upgrade. Or, I think this mind game is used in this is probably the most common one right now. So, it's become a huge tell in Protoss versus Zerg, where the Protoss player, if they're going to go Stargate first, Parting used this in GSL, this specific mind game. If you're going to go Stargate first, you delay Warp Gate. What you do, because Stargate costs extra gas, if you want to do the rest of the build, like get the Nexus on time, you have to delay Warp Gate for a short amount of time and get your Stargate. So, but the first Overlord, 90% of the time, is right there to see when you start Warp Gate. There's a little animation for those of you who don't watch closely ever. So the Zerg can see Warp Gate and when it starts, and they're watching, believe me. And you'll see that in first person. So Parting does not start Warp Gate. He gets an Adept, he Chrono Boosts the Adept like a normal thing, doesn't start Warp Gate for like 15 seconds, but he builds a Twilight Council and goes for like 7-8 Gate Adept. And his opponent, let's say Dark, I don't think it was Dark, but Dark, just like saw that because at some point the meta had gotten to a point where like, oh, he's not going Warp Gate, it's Stargate. Like, Dark had built like 5 Queens, he's building a Spore in every base, he doesn't have a Roach Warren done yet, and then boom, here comes parting with like 8 Gate Adept. It's because like the mind game developed to that point. That wouldn't work in Diamond League. In Diamond League, the Protoss would just assume, or the Zerg would just assume that the Protoss was doing something dangerous, and they're not sure what because they don't actually know that the Cybercore has an animation when Warpgate is researching, so not only would they not understand why Warpgate is not researching, but either one, they would think they're either one, incompetent, or two, not understand what build that meant. So like, that's the kind of high-level stuff that I really like when I probably miss a lot more than I notice. But at the same time, Dark could have just gotten Overlord speed and sent his Overlord in, but that would be a slight investment. Not that expensive, but I love that. Like, that's the type of stuff that I think makes, especially Starcraft II, it's less common in Brood War. Brood War is more of like, you know what I'm building. I know what you're building. Well, let's go. And I think there's a time and a place for that, but I do think that adds a lot of interest, is the fog of war, the withholding of information, is one of the things that makes real-time strategy real-time strategy. And is possibly the more I say it out loud, and the more I think about it, the more I think it is. That actually is what RTS is. That's what RTS needs to be. That's it. Yeah, there you go. Like, in my opinion, a game where you can, sure, it's important. Like, you need to have a certain amount of basic requirement. Like a player who does like, I don't know, let's say 150 APM and has that down and is diligent with their scouting, their information gathering, and picks a safe strategy, should be able to win against a less skilled player 90% of the time. There should be 10% where sometimes that less skilled player is able to pull a particular strategy that is so outside the range of your better player that they'll pull it off. Or like a strategy, like maybe not like, but a strategy in the same theme of a cannon battery rush, like a Immortal Warp Prism cannon battery rush. I don't like that as an example. Because it feels a lot more like the Protoss does this, and then the Zerg is like, well, I hope they screw up that. So that's not a good example for a build, but it's a good example of a strategy that sometimes works even if the better player is the better player. And that comes back to, I think, 2 factions, 2 sides, 2 races. I think factions is where it'll end up. I don't have any idea where they are in the story. I was more focused in my, like, initially asking, like, how much of an esport, how wide of a reach, like, are we guaranteed on PC? It's going to be a PC real-time strategy game. Like, the focus is on using your mouse and keyboard, having more APM than you can get on your phone. And so, therefore, it won't make... There's almost no way it's going to make more money on average than, like, a MOBA game or a mobile game. But the idea is it can be successful on the same level or close to many of those games. Maybe I am underestimating RTS in and of itself. Maybe I'm thinking of it as it's been for 25 years. As a game for hardcore 1v1 players. But I'm trying to think a little outside that box. And, well, one, I think it looks like a team, like a 3v3. It's a little closer to Warcraft 3 on micro versus macro with 3 resources, but I think it's a really cool... This is like a big asterisk. Where one of the resources can be destroyed or denied, like actively, and 2 factions. Like, you pick Earth or Sky. And of course there's a lot of tech paths and a lot of trees you can go from there. But that's kind of what I'm thinking initially. So we'll take, I guess, more active feedback now. That's where I am at the moment as I work my way through. No, not my meat. Any chance you 1v1 Destiny? We all 1v1 Destiny every day. And we try to make that day better than the day before it. My Steam, that reminds me, my Steam updated Destiny 2. I didn't ask it to, but maybe I will waste my time and money on that again. Your statements make it sound like you think cheese is unhealthy, or is that an exaggeration? No, I don't. I was trying to convey that cheese is one of the most important things in RTS. It's just, you don't want to make it the most important thing. Like, it should work. Just such a low percentage of the time. Like, you can't be a cheesy player necessarily, or at least not as actively. I think in Starcraft II, there's a little bit too much reliance on, like, you didn't see that. Or you didn't expect this. And I think it's fun to watch a lot of the time, but it feels a little much. Like, it feels like sometimes there's a bit of a... It's a little too much. It's a little too much. That's that. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I'm just saying my personal opinion is it's a little much. I like it, but it's a little much. Do you want subclasses in the 2 factions or just flat factions? I mean, like, as Terrans complain about, like, we want to be able to play bio and mech all equally in all matchups and all maps. But I like more the, like, I'd say Earth is more like Terran, where you have a strong set of slower ground units, but you could choose from some, like, more mobile units, but it's mostly focused on positioning and setting up a good fight, maybe with your teammates, drawing your opponents into position, because I'm still on the 3v3 thing. I pretty strongly believe it should be a team game, and I don't know if that's more, like, it feels like more than 3 players is too much, and 2v2 isn't really a team game, so. But the idea is, like, you're not forced to build the same set of units every time. Though in Brood War, there were only like 10 units per race, maybe a little more, but essentially you're seeing the same 3-4 units in the composition each time. I feel like that's a little, like, that doesn't add enough flavor, or variety. That leans too much into the, like, who's building slightly more of them, which is fun, but not great for spectating or necessarily playing anything but super competitively. Could you see yourself playing a game that forces you to play with a team? I'm ranked just as high in Rocket League as I am in SC2. Like, once again, this is not about me. I'm going to play anyways. And I came from World of Warcraft Arena many, many moons ago into Starcraft II. But I'm not the target demo. Like, we're trying to think of a game that is great for RTS players. As they are, and also for bringing in people who didn't know they like RTS, but are willing to give it a shot. So, are RTS fans becoming the boomers of gaming? I mean, kind of literally. RTS is... I have no data to back this up compared to other genres, but by a large margin, I'll tell you this. Compared to YouTube gaming, I know the stats for YouTube gaming as a whole, and for StarCraft II and my YouTube audience specifically. So, YouTube gaming is like 25% in the 25 to 34-year-old demographic, which is still a solid percent. You got like 18 to 24, under 18, which some people, bless their hearts, don't lie about. You got 18 to 24, which is Remember, 25 to 34 is 9 years. 18 to 24 is 6 years. This is just what we use. But 18 to 24 is like 50%. 25 to 34 is like 25%. And 35 plus is the other 25%. Combined with a small percentage who's under 18. But once again, bless their hearts. Well, probably larger than over 35. But for me, that 25 to 34 percentage on the WinterStarcraft YouTube channel is about double that. It's about 50%. So when I call you out individually, I can be pretty specific. And I think my demographic is pretty consistent with RTS in general. So, to answer your joke question, yeah, they're becoming the boomers as it stands, but the intent is for that not to continue while still also appealing to us boomers. So, how do you feel about decisions that are made out of / before the game, like prestige points used on commanders and co-op, or runes and masteries? That doesn't feel like it has much of a place to me. Maybe there are like small subclasses, but like not so significant that a player would only practice. Like, let's say they're Earth Boulders, which are the Turtle Terrans, and then there's Earth Pebbles, which are the more mobile-oriented. This is not a good example. But like maybe one has your units have 10% more HP and do 10% less damage, and the other is the opposite. Maybe that, but not like this has this set of units and this has this one and they share these. But what is the game we're talking about? Been listening for 10 minutes. We're not. Right now, for those just joining or in the middle of the video who skipped here, Frost Giant Studios, led by Tim Morten and Tim Campbell, the lead designer of Starcraft II Legacy of the Void for 5 years, and the lead campaign director for Warcraft III, have recruited a bunch of, several other former Starcraft II and Blizzard esports team members and created a new game studio, raised nearly $5 million, and they're making an RTS game for PC. And it is not Starcraft III, is not Warcraft 4, and the subtext is those are not happening at least quicker than Frost Giant Studios releases something. That's at the very least that. So, and now we're talking about what that game would look like. I did my, here's the summary. This is what's happening. I did that video, and then I said I'm going to talk for like an hour. And we're well into that now. It might be more. What do you think about game speed, map size, defender's advantage, high ground flanking opportunities? I think a lot. I guess articulating that is the harder part. That's why it sounds like we're not talking about a game, because we're not. It doesn't exist. But I think a game coming out with a competitive. I'm not even really going to touch on a single player co-op. That would take a lot more thinking. I have a lot less experience, and even though I know that's a huge audience, that's not my area of expertise. So I'm thinking about competitive esports. And right now we're working off of like a 3v3 with 2 factions that's more focused on micro than macro, but still very like income management is still a huge part. That's kind of what makes RTS, but a little closer to the fights taking as long as they did in Warcraft 3. And I assume they'll fight. It's not going to be like a negotiation. Well, the negotiations would be short, and then they would fight. But like in Warcraft 3, fights can sometimes be like 5 minutes long. Okay, maybe not quite that, but depending on the heroes and the compositions of units and like how much support you have and all that. Whereas in Starcraft 2, it's like Disruptor, Storm, Colossus. Oh wait, 20 battle cruisers, and so like I think StarCraft II kind of went overboard with, we have the technology to bring all these units around. Like, StarCraft 1 was partially balanced by, you could only select 12 precious little Zerglings at a time. 6 supply of Zerglings was the max you could control with any individual control group because of technological limitations. And that means that Zerglings could beat Marines in 1v1. A 25 mineral unit would beat a Marine, at least before real upgrades, in 1v1. 6 Zerglings would murder 6 Marines on the open field. Like, partially because the technology wasn't there. But in StarCraft 2, we're like, here's 200 Banelings, and you can build 200 more if you manage your supply right, and go. So fights, I feel, kind of, they tend to go very quickly. It kind of is a whole lot of flirting, and we go back and forth like, oh, you're there, you're there, you're there. Oh, fight, 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 and then we're done. So normal Saturday night, but it's not so much like a constant battle as a dance. Now there are plenty of games that are back and forth, but there's also a lot of games that everybody kind of moves around until there's a game deciding fight. With nothing more than like little skirmishes. I would rather a game where, and this would happen more in a team game just by the nature of it. Like if it'd take 3v3 in StarCraft, but like somebody's fighting, maybe one player. And now this is another reason why team games add drama. Oh, it looks like Cyril is taking on Maru and Innovation's Sky armies with his Earth army, but he has focused on the anti-Sky Earth spec, and that means he might be able to micro his way out of this one. Like that kind of interaction. Like, just having more than one player in the game makes things dramatic. Like, in Counter-Strike, or Rocket League, or any other team game, when one player takes on 2 or 3 players and wins, is that not some of the most dramatic... Like, not necessarily, like, wins the game, but, like, they actually won that fight. Did you see what they did? Like, got a couple headshots, like, actually scored the goal, beating 2 players, like... I didn't even think about that aspect as a viewer. And sure, one player can outplay one player in StarCraft II, but sometimes the fights are over, and sometimes... I think it suffers, even though it's a pretty good spectator sport. Sometimes you can't really see what's happening because of the way there's so many units moving so quickly, doing so much damage. You can't always appreciate how much the players are doing, even if there is a ton of like Marine splits and Baneling control. And you might be like, Baneling control? Who does that? Actually, most Zergs have a lot of advanced Baneling control that gets overshadowed by desperately watching the Marines sprint away from them. But everybody's watching the Marines. Nobody's watching the Banelings. Besides the Marines, maybe. But that's kind of an example of how I think things can move too fast in StarCraft II to really appreciate it. Like, besides having a team game, having a game that, one, you might have to rely on your teammates, or you have your strong individual players. Team games are just more dynamic. They're more popular. They're more accessible. I'm pretty solidly in the it should be a team game camp. Maybe there's a 1v1 mode, but it's not designed or balanced around that. I hope I've convinced a few of you, but who knows? Maybe I'm entirely wrong, and that's a terrible idea. I'm thinking if you have 3 resources and 2 extra resources to build like advanced ground units, and the other contributes only to air. Like, I'd like a more simplified... a more simplified version. Not necessarily, I kind of like, no, you can't have too many resources. I like that resources are flexible, especially in StarCraft. Like, you have minerals, you have gas, and you have a lot of options. What I really don't like, and this is kind of the crutch that is used by a lot of games, every MOBA is essentially just this. But it's the crutch used by a lot of games is upgrades. And even in StarCraft II, and especially in, like, obviously co-op and in, like, custom games, is like, well, you get an upgrade for this, and that, and this, and that, and this. what I think is part of the reason StarCraft II is so good, and StarCraft 1 even better on this. Actually, no, it had a lot of extra upgrades, but like the units that come out of the factory are like 60 to 80% of as strong as they could be, even when they get upgrades. Like the upgrades definitely make a huge difference, but there's like basic upgrades, and then there's a few use case upgrades like Yamato cannon, or like lurker range. But your units are pretty solid out of the box, as opposed to now you have to get the advanced medallion of super speed in order to jump high enough to unleash the aerial cannon, which you upgrade from the aerial cannon center. Like, I feel that's just some, like, a lot of strategy games rely on that, and I really, and if you think of MOBA games, it's like, once he gets his Radiance, he can get the Aegis of the Immortals, so that way he can eat the cheese. It's like, wait a second, one of these is not like the others. But it still is the case, though, like, where even in MOBAs, and that's what I think is one of the most boring parts of MOBAs, is like, now they're gonna go sit in the forest or sit in the lane, and they're gonna right-click things every few seconds until they have enough money to buy something so they can be useful. I really like the way, like, I hate this word, robust, but the units and control in StarCraft and Warcraft, but mostly StarCraft, are robust. Like, your units are good out of the box. They get better with upgrades, but it's not required for the most part. So I think that's important, and that's why I lean towards 2 factions. Because that way all you have to do is balance them, and with potential for mirror matchups, obviously. Like, you could have Earth versus Earth or Earth versus Sky. But those are the only 2 matchups. Or 3 Earth players versus 3 Sky players. But really, 3 Sky players in this meta? I mean, either they're trying to make a statement, or they don't know what they're doing. But those Earth players, I mean, Earth is very strong on this map pool. Do you think SC2 is an accessible game to the average gamer? Would focusing on micro, APM / map management make a new game too niche? I'm actually going to fall back to the interview a little with this. There was a statement I hadn't learned of. As for PC tech pushing RTS games forward, Campbell says that he believes machine learning and AI will make big contributions, and improvements in automated coaching tips will be important for making the games more accessible. So essentially what SC2 replay stats does, but much more actively applied to a game. They are very cognizant of the fact that SC2 is one of the... I don't think it's actually that hard to get into, but it's intimidating. And there's like a skill wall you have to scale in order to kind of feel like you are even at the floor. Like, it's not... I'll explain it, but it's not a complicated game, but it is a difficult one. I don't think it necessarily has to be that, though esports should be close. Whereas Dota is both complicated and difficult. Dota, you got to read a goddamn encyclopedia to understand half of the stuff that's going on, and you just kind of guess on the other half based on what you learned in the first half. That is... So, but StarCraft, I think, has this extra aura of being difficult, and that comes down to partially, you never have a teammate helping you in 1v1. Sometimes you have your opponent helping you, which is very cute in the Silver League, unless you realize at the higher leagues, that's a total douche move. Like, for all those Silver League replays we see, like, I think that Hydras would be good against that. If you said that in Diamond, I would want to slap you across the face. I don't care that I'm smurfing 2 leagues below, alright? I gotta... You douche, and you're beating me, and you're telling me how I could be better? Anyways. So. The one, by its nature, a team game is better to learn. Even with random teammates who half the time will get chat filtered. Like, even with that, a team game is just naturally better to learn. And that's part of the reason why SC2, at the end of the day, is not a very accessible game competitively. It might, like, co-op, okay, you have a teammate. Arcade, almost entirely teammates. 1v1, it's either some other dude who doesn't know what they're talking about, or the AI, which isn't very good, unless it's Alpha Star, which was on the ladder with the other people who are fighting you. I gotta... Have you heard of the new RTS that was announced by Frost Giant? I haven't. What's that about? Former SC2 and Warcraft devs. Pig has a YouTube video. That's very exciting. Like the Starcraft pig? So for those of you on YouTube, this is my normal day. If you're wondering why this is here, part of it is so that way, when that guy comes back with a different name and a different face and a different memory, in 4 minutes, we have something to reference. So, and yes, Artos, yeah, all that. We're talking about the best RTS game. And then, like, remember, I'm filtering your feedback through my experience. Like, y'all are here, I'm here, and then over there is Frost Giant, and then they put it on the computer. And when you talk to me and I see ideas, that gets me thinking, but I might not be like, that's a good idea, but that idea is a good idea to think about. And that's kind of my intent to Frost Giant, who's doing that with dozens of other people, like this pig character I've heard of, Artosis, Day 9, and like, what about this guy? Yeah, probably them. What about Husky? No, probably not. But thoughts on map points, interest. Like, right now, it's literally in the brainstorming phase. But there is nothing, like, there is no game. There is no game that's being developed. They're figuring out what to develop. We're a long way. Like, by the time you remember, oh yeah, the contract was 3 years, not just next week for SC2, and there will be competitive StarCraft esports. I want to speak on that for a sec. So let's be the cynic that everyone is, and I kind of am inside, believe it or not, a little cynical. It does feel like it's the people. So I'm gonna start by saying I like Planetside 2 a lot. Planetside 2 is a game, much like StarCraft II, that everyone thought died in 2014, and are continually surprised people still play it. Except Planetside 2, which I play actively, it doesn't have a huge player base. It's not big, like, it's not the big money maker, either for the company who makes it, Rogue Planet Games, more on that in a sec, or for, like, content creators, but it's a fun game. And now here's a part of it. Planetside 2 split off from Daybreak Games to be an independent developer, still published under Daybreak Games, which, in hindsight, not a good, not necessarily the best name for a game company, but just Daybreak Games, you know. But under that independent leadership and independent development, they've come out with a couple big updates that have included a lot of things, from interacting with other players to individual accomplishments and individual objectives in the last year that have really turned the game from the slow decline that people were speaking of into maybe not like booming, but stability, and like gets people interested in the game. And the reason I stuck with it, not just like it's kind of the best and only game of its kind. I know one of those. But I talked with the developers, and not that many, but I knew, and this is going to sound super cliche, but I knew the people working on it really cared. Like, they want to make the best game. They might not always put out the best stuff. Like, they might make bad decisions, but they care. Like, they are invested in the success and, like, people enjoying the game. Like, that game. Not any, like, game generally, but Planetside 2. Shout out to Rel. Whatever opinions or thoughts you have on the developers, like, I knew they wanted to support it. And that's a big deal. So, StarCraft II, like, the reason, not nearly the only reason, but one of the reasons I continue to play it is that I know that the people behind it were some of the most passionate, literally like their entire life in and out of whatever job they're doing. Like Kevin Dong, for example, he was at Team Liquid. For those of you who know what that means, they know what that means. He was at Team Liquid, and essentially, he made so many spreadsheets, like an EVE player, but for co-op, on co-op, and was like, essentially, the lead co-op expert of anyone who didn't work at Blizzard. So they're like, you're hired. That's what a goddamn nerd he is. And eventually, he became lead of co-op. Like, that was, like, he liked it so much, he just got really into it. He went to Blizzard. So all those people, well, very many of the people who were like that for Starcraft II, well, they're here now. Honestly, the two standouts are Tim Morten and Kevin Dong. Tim, he's a little soft-spoken. I mean, he speaks fine, but, like, he's a little soft-spoken, but that kind of, like, you don't feel the passion as much, but he's super passionate about it. That and craft beer. I hope I'm not outing him, but he really likes craft beer as well. But also RTS, and he made an RTS company, not a craft beer company, but very passionate about both things. So, respect there. Which Tim? Let's just say both, but Tim Morten. So, essentially, the people who helped make StarCraft II Legacy of the Void are now Frost Giant Studios. That is part of it. And that's why I brought up the Planetside thing. Like, it's... Planetside 2 was and continues to be, you should play right now, free to play, an established game. But they have to work within the confines of the game as it is. Like, making Planetside 3 is a lot different, or making a new MMO FPS, which it sounds weird because no one does it, is very different than developing a game that's already established. Like StarCraft 2 has gone 10 years. There's only so much you can do within the engine itself. So it's super exciting. Oh yeah, another person, again, at Frost Giant is Day9 and Tasteless's mom, which is what she usually leads with, and not like, I worked at Blizzard Esports for 5 years, but I'm Day9 and Tasteless's mom, which, I'll be honest, carries more weight than I worked at Blizzard Esports for 5 years for me, personally. But, like, I know. But good work, both jobs. Oh yeah, they're brothers, in case you didn't figure that one out. Maybe because of their plot armor. But, so, like, I think even if at some point it's like, maybe they're not making every decision that seems perfect to you personally, or maybe doesn't even pay off financially, which would really suck. But I believe they want to make an RTS. They would not be going in. They would not be going into this. They're not gonna go make a mobile game that's an auto battler. All right, maybe Direct Strike Online, but actually, wait a second. If they could, though, there you go. That's how you fund the RTS. But Direct Strike is already online. But you got to put online so people know it's like, you know what I mean. But they're going to put everything they got into making RTS games. So that's why I'm super invested, obviously. Also, they made a great choice from a marketing perspective of reaching out to people like myself, and pretty much everyone in RTS, like StarCraft 2 and RTS, which is the other Warcraft players, pretty much, beforehand, because, of course, obviously. So, I don't know, like, I feel like there's so much to talk about. I'm trying to keep it to coherent points, but it kind of rambles a bit. I'm trying. I'm continually failing more and more. This is actually super exciting. And I want to temper that with, if you are really hyped for this, what you should do, like, if you want to be on the bleeding edge of this, you should keep playing StarCraft II. Why? Because you know what would be Like, here's your cynical part. The best chance for success for Frost Giant Studios to put out a successful RTS game that gets traction and gets interest to show it off is if StarCraft II still has a stable and reliable viewer base. Now, the cynical part is it might cannibalize that. Like, if it is just a better game than StarCraft II, then maybe most of those players move on with many transferable skills into Frost Giant Craft or whatever. But the worst thing to possibly do right now is be like, well, I'm going to stop playing StarCraft 2, and then whenever Frost Giant comes up with something, like, it's not going to be a year. It's probably not going to be 2. I have no idea, and I think they have no real idea either. But you're not going to make the next RTS game in 2 years even. 2 years sounds short to me. Maybe a beta or an alpha. So StarCraft 2 still has competitive. You paid $80 for a Frost Giant Craft pre-order. You mean Frost Giant Citizen Elite Premium package. Invest today. It's a riot. But there's a reason SC2 RTS is so popular. Yeah, like I feel SC2. I play Age of Empires. I've played Age of Empires. It just feels a little. One, it's kind of not that spectator friendly. I haven't looked at it. I know there's more coming out soon. But it just feels a little on the slow side for a wider audience. Whereas, how do you feel about having different non-competitive game modes that take time away from the competitive game but attract a larger audience? I think that's key. Like co-op and SC2. One of the focuses for several years in StarCraft II by most of the people at Frost Giant was transferring single player and co-op players. These, I'm going to throw out numbers and know that the numbers either one might not be accurate or I'm remembering off significantly. There was a point when Legacy of the Void came out. 75% of the people who had bought StarCraft II never played even a single multiplayer game. 75% did not play any multiplayer. Like, not any. Not even, like, placement matches. With Legacy of the Void, it went down to about, like, with co-op, and it was down to, before free-to-play came out, 40-50%. Because co-op bridged the gap a lot more from campaign to having a teammate but still kind of campaign to now I know other people exist, right? Like, so the summary is it's a huge deal. And the intent is to have a single player element. Like, it's supposed much StarCraft 2 is unique in that it's like 7 different games in one. I don't think people routinely appreciate how dynamic StarCraft 2 is, how robust, however many other buzzwords. Like, StarCraft 2 has one of the most popular single-player campaigns in gaming history, especially on PC. It also has a hugely popular co-op mode. It has dozens of, like especially Direct Strike, but other arcade games that have niche audiences. And on top of that, it has the most competitive RTS esport in the world. Like, before we get to 1v1, we also have these other games. Whereas Rocket League has... Have you ever played Hoops in Rocket League? You should try it. They need more people to queue up for that. The single-player campaign in Rocket League... and the single-player campaign in Counter-Strike didn't really strike me. The other 4 players on my team seem to be very mean, which is weird they would write that in. Also, the voice acting isn't very good, from what I noticed. And the terrorists seem to win a lot, which doesn't... yeah. So, you see my point. Counter-Strike has a single player. He didn't see my point. But they do reference that. um, where they do want single player modes, custom games. They it was referenced in the initial announcement. User generated content. And now you cynical Blizzard fans will be like, oh, so Blizzard doesn't want Dota getting away from them. I don't know, maybe there'll probably be some sort of agreement like that. But they understand that custom games and a strong map editor, or game editor, or whatever it ends up being, is important, especially to the type of people that make RTS games. Like, think about it. Half of esports right now can be tied to Warcraft 3. Half is a weird number. But, like, Warcraft 3 spawned Dota, which Blizzard is very unhappy that they didn't get a lock on, Rip Heroes of the Storm. But Dota 2 and all MOBA games, League of Legends, Overwatch, you're not going to convince me it's an FPS. It's a goddamn MOBA game. That's why I can't tell what's going on. It's essentially a MOBA. On top of the fact that modern RTS, like Starcraft II is closer to Warcraft 3 than Brood War. I mean, the mechanics and the story are from Brood War, but like the actual physical way you play it is closer to Warcraft 3 because technology advances, from what I've heard. So Warcraft 3, thankfully we got the lead campaign designer there, but is kind of the start of modern RTS, I would say. I think it'd be hard to disagree with that, though I'm sure someone will. And then StarCraft 2 is modern RTS. I know Age of Empires has a big fan base, but I think it's a fraction of what StarCraft 2 is even today. And in fact, more people play StarCraft 2 today than did 3 years ago. But anyway, like it's comparing like tennis to badminton. It's like there's some real, like that's very impressive, but also really I gotta but yeah, I don't know, there's no point to all this. I'm just kind of talking out loud, and since enough of you seem to listen to me talk for long enough, I just keep talking. But we've talked about what I think and we think that a modern RTS should look like to appeal to the widest audience while still being as competitive, if not more competitive than StarCraft II. And that's the main competition. We understand that in the next probably 2 years, maybe more, maybe unlikely, but maybe less, there won't be anything. Like, there will be ideas, there will be concepts, there will be videos, there will be maybe short teasers. Even someone like me who will be working on a regular basis. Like, I'm not working for Frost Giant, but like many others, not just me. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm anything special, but I know a little bit about RTS, and I've worked with most of the people on the team before. But on a regular basis, I'll be giving feedback on what they're working on. I'll be bringing feedback from you guys. I'll try to remember that they were listening to me for 3 years when I kept saying things. And they're like, that sounds like a good idea. And what they really meant was, we want to do that, but we don't have enough money. Because for several years and half a dozen community summits, I said some things that I know did not fall on deaf ears, but just never materialized. Maybe we can get a little bit of that now. And that's my optimism. So... but yeah, I like to think I have a pretty decent perspective as someone, my income, my personal interest is not just in a game that I can play. Like, I don't want to win or lose. I'm not trying to win the tournaments. I'm not trying to build a game that necessarily, like a game I want to play, but like you guys are watching because I'm sitting here talking for 2 hours. So I want a game that you want to watch, that you want to play, because back to the cynicism, that's how I make money. So, in all of this, that's kind of important. So I want a game that's widely popular and worth investing in as well. So, without being like, I think Earth should be the strong faction, where Sky only wins 20% of the time. But how exciting! No, Sky should be nearly equal with Earth. We will see. But like right now with StarCraft II, most of you don't play. I'm gonna do a live poll. A live poll of people who are just responding in chat. So that's a little selection bias. But how many of you play ladder regularly? 1v1 ladder. Whatever you describe as regularly, like on a regular basis, you find yourself playing. Yes or no? That's just a yes or no question. But like, you just it's up to you. But you know what regularly means. Like, do you decide like I'm gonna go home and play some ladder tonight? I think more than most other esports, that is what it suffers from, and that has to be. Like, it's going to be really easy to get caught up in what is the most hyper-competitive, highest APM, highest level micro, while ignoring, like, whatever the skill floor ends up being. So, well, that's going to have to be a big factor. And I think, like, they're getting feedback from a lot of pro players. I'm sure. I nearly guarantee you the vast majority of pro players will be like, 1v1. It's 1v1. That's how you play professional RTS. It's 1v1. And they might legitimately believe that. They might either actively or subconsciously be influenced by the fact that their paycheck is based on winning in a 1v1 esport. But that's kind of the city, and I think that kind of describes it. Yeah. And that number has slowly slid down over the years, both partially because of my audience being my audience and my content, and also just StarCraft II. Still fun to watch, but ain't nobody got time for that. Or blood pressure medication. So they should just not offer 1v1. Well, once again, I don't think anything is set in stone. Like, it could be 10v10. What about a 10v10? Somehow we have the technology, it's super well optimized. 10v10. Now we're talking managing your own army. Like, maybe it's an MMO RTS. I don't think that is particularly on the table, but like 2,000 Zerg. Like, let's ignore technological requirements. Oh, this is another part of StarCraft II that I think you can rein in here. So, StarCraft II had to be within a certain bounds because sometimes there are 4 units on the screen and sometimes there are 400. Like, that was part of the limitations with literally, like, skins and stuff in multiplayer. That was part of the limitation of, like, what the game looks like, is because technologically, it should look comparatively good with 400 units as with 4. You can't have a competitive game where, like, if you go over 200 units, half the people can't play it. That's not as much of a concern now as it was in, like, 2010. I think another thing is, and I've already passed on this feedback, I don't think it has to look... I was going to say good, but that's not what I mean. I don't think it has to look realistic. Like, I think StarCraft II, honestly, kind of went a little far towards being realistic, both in graphic and sound design. Like, Brood War, because of technological restrictions, is very distinct. And especially the sounds. I love the sounds. But I don't think you have to, like... It looks like we're actually at war with the Soviets. It's like, okay, no. And I doubt we're going down that road. But, like, it's like I'm there on the Eastern Front commanding my armies from a drone. No. I think, like, a more stylized... Because this is me kind of speaking to... The team's probably not going to be huge. And part of the reason why Blizzard is able to do that and make games that look... like, technologically and visually that impressive is, like, that takes a huge team. A huge team. Not just... And that's before any cinematics or anything. Unless it's Command and Conquer, in which case... Well, hello there, Stalin. Like, It is I, a great actor who totally isn't also a game designer. It's like, okay. All right. And so on and so forth. Who knows? But I think there are a lot of games nowadays. I find myself more like, besides like StarCraft II and Planetside, like the games I like on a single player side are not so much like this is realistic graphics as opposed to stylized. Like, I'm trying to think of a game and I'm blanking that would be kind of close because it would be 3D. AAA RTS is dead though. Yes, that is what people say. People say other things too. Do you think aesthetic is important? Yeah, I think it is. Does it have to be a sci-fi game? Borderlands, I guess, is a good example. I'm not actually a huge... Or Team Fortress 2 is actually a good example, I think. Like, it might not be as visually impressive, but making a clear, distinct, like, style that is very easy. Like, that's what StarCraft II suffers from. And that's why half of pro players play on potato graphic settings, not just to get like 4 more FPS, but because they literally turn off there's a reduced violence option, fun fact, in the menus. They turn that off because the blood gets in the way. Like that is literally where pro players are. So I think a game that focuses more on being visually distinct is very like Minecraft. Minecraft exists. Though I do like the shaders that make it look kind of realistic. But Minecraft exists. Minecraft, for depending on the person, can be super simple. Or is that ray tracing, Winter? I don't know. Yeah, some of you more of. Okay. How about this? I'm going to include any version of StarCraft 2. Arcade, ladder, co-op, whatever. Which game do you play more? My friends here on this channel that's mostly focused on StarCraft. And, okay, this is not working out as well as I thought. This does not prove my point. I should have been ladder or Minecraft. We may do that later. It's like, Winter, I'm actually... You know, that's the real poll. These live polls are fun. But, we're going to hold for a minute. But, now we're just talking about like the art style. I'd like a game that's more distinct. Like, both sound design and visual. It does have to be sci-fi. Because we're talking... I don't really have strong feelings on the story. I like sci-fi. But I also like... Amazon has me pretty much pegged for sci-fi and fantasy. I read books. I like books. I like to read good books. I like The Expanse. I like Stormlight Archives. I like everything in between. But usually it's fantasy or sci-fi. Sci-fi, which increasingly is the existential threat of our entire existence because we understand too much about the universe. But also sometimes they scale it down. But a game doesn't necessarily have to be either of those two things. I'm honestly not a huge fan of steampunk games. They always seem to be fun, but I can't get into them. Steampunk is a little bit of both, and they come together, and it looks cool, but also, it just feels weird. I don't know. I don't know what a good example of steampunk would be. But, so like, would it be a fantasy game? Would it be a sci-fi game? Would it be pseudo-realism? Like... So, what is your favorite StarCraft mode? Just answer that right now. I'd be down for a mythical Greco-Roman. Oh yeah, Hades did a good job with that. Like, is it like prehistoric? I think it's simplest to make like a more sci-fi RTS. Maybe set in like a Battlefield 2142 type of like near-ish future. For Earth and Sky, obviously. Or it could be like spaceships fighting each other all the time. Like, because I think it depends on how much you want to reinvent the wheel and how much you want to kind of, like, are you going to have your basic melee, your basic ranged, your basic air and ground units? Like, is there going to be ground, air? Is there going to be air, earth, water? Or is it just earth and air? Like, so, this is still not proving my point, but it's a plurality, not a majority, I guess. Okay, wait. One more. One more poll. No, not. Why is Jimmy? Come on. But yeah, how many Cold War RTS games? I mean, some of them worked on them. I think sci-fi. I like sci-fi. I think it's easiest to make a game that people won't be like, but why do the mutas flap their wings in space? It's because of their genetic strains, obviously. That keeps their circulation in the coldness of space or whatever bullshit. But why are their wings like Swiss cheese on this skin? Why do they even have wings if they're so highly Shut up. Shut up. I don't... It's the nanites. Yes. How often do you like to see balance updates and patches? Honestly, I think the modern version... So there are two different directions. I don't actually know with Counter-Strike, but Counter-Strike is kind of... Like, it rarely gets a true balance update, right? Like, there will be some different maps phased into a pool. There you go. This is what we're looking for. And then there's, like, Dota and League, which get a new champion every few weeks. And then there's Starcraft, which is kind of in between. Like, Brood War hasn't had a balance patch for 22 years. Okay, 20 years. Whereas Starcraft II was getting them every 6 months to a year, like, significant ones. I kind of like the idea. I don't think, like... Because with StarCraft II, the intention is essentially, like many things StarCraft II, to get it to a good spot and let it go. Which is kind of what they did with Brood War. Not necessarily by design, but that's just kind of how games worked at the time. But with smaller and smaller patches until it's in a good spot. I like more like the MOBA games. Like, I know Dota has had several... like, game-changing patches. Like, that entirely change how you play. It's still the same game, but you want to be more aggressive at this time, or kills count for this much, that kind of stuff. I like that. I don't know if that's not, like, the most popular games that are closest in line seem to do that. I think I did actually really like the, every year balance update, which they said they're not doing this year. But they will be doing balance updates. Active development means no more, like, co-op commanders and stuff. Partially because the guy who cared most about co-op is now at Frost Giant. But, I do like the kind of, like... That was good content for me. It's like, on this new balance patch, every pro gamer hates it. But some of the teams are adapting more quickly. Like, and then, of course, Rocket League has never gotten a balance update. That's not true. But it's effectively true. Like, before the maps used to matter in Rocket League, and then they got rid of that. Before the cars used to have different hitboxes, and then they kind of narrowed that down. But essentially, yes, Rocket League has gotten to a point where it's like, this is what Rocket League is. It's essentially soccer, but with rocket cars, so way fucking better. I gotta play Rocket League. It's free. But... yeah, I think in both terms of interest in players, let's assume we're like, even though it makes a game harder to remember, we're gonna just say it's a team game, though that's not even remotely necessarily the case. Like, they have not said which way they're leaning. I'm sure they're a long way off figuring that out, set in stone, but. I think that contributes a lot. Like, not like adding a new unit every 2 months, but like air units are now 20% better in this scenario, because of this year's balance patch. Whereas maps have 20% less resources, which means you have to focus more on hit and run attacks and cost efficiency than on just building the best army and grinding your opponent down kind of stuff. Like, that kind of gameplay affecting change where you can still play similar styles, but you have to change your tactics, I think is good. I think on like a yearly basis or something like that. That's my opinion. Like, these are my first impressions of that. I struggle with going from objective as I can be me to what is my actual opinion me, because my opinion might not be right. Rarely are opinions, but I sometimes filter my first impressions through but what makes sense, rather than saying just what pops into my head first, which is how Twitch chat works. So, but after 6 years of being on camera almost more often than not, you learn to think first. Occasionally. Oh, the hero's way. What is your opinion on AOE2 generally having more players in a single match? Like, I think team games, small team games, is a better way to go for a modern RTS. And I stress how much you have to like get out of the mindset of, well, team games aren't how Starcraft is, or Warcraft. Well, Warcraft has a little more teams, but because what if the game was balanced around teams? I just bring it back to that, as opposed to shoehorned because it's balanced around 1v1. But I think I'm going to leave it about there. I'm going to do live viewer polls. And on YouTube, if you made it this far and you listened to my ranting, I'm just going to do a few rapid-fire polls. You might be like, Winter, but if you're subscribed on stream for free with Amazon Prime or otherwise, but do it on browser, not on mobile, because Apple and Google take a cut from the mobile stores. But don't your votes count for 3 times as much because you gave money? Well, this is just opinion polls, but one versus one or team game. What would you like to see? What would it look like? So we're just thinking. I'm not thinking about single player. I'm not really thinking about genre. It's a bit of a split, and I definitely like. It's weird to think about team games as competitive. All right. New question. Which genre? We're just gonna go all over the place. Sci-fi, fantasy, modern / recent history, or slight, like, I guess those are the 3 big ones. Sci-fi, fantasy. I think I'd put like prehistoric, like under fantasy, probably. Like some like you said in medieval times is effectively fantasy. Like nobody even knows if those times even happened. So. I as StarCraft players, you lean towards sci-fi, but actually, I didn't even put Steampunk on the list because I'm refusing to consider it at this stage. But I'm open to opportunities. Isn't sci-fi a form of fantasy? Yes, but nobody cares what you think, and you know that's not what it means. Except I'm actually asking your opinion. What I meant to say is nobody cares about the distinction. Stop bringing it up. Yeah, sci-fi is where they say nanites instead of magic. You might be like, well, what's Star Wars? That's a fantasy movie. No. The midi-chlorians. It's science. Science magic. It's the color. Anyways, one more is how many factions, races? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, 5 plus, and then probably way more than 5. Ah! Five plus, like, so I don't know if there are any well-established. I guess Age of Empires has like, it has more than 5 factions, right? Like, historical. Starcraft is 3, Warcraft is 4. I'm actually thinking 2. But this is like, I think this is truly an opportunity to kind of reset a little. I won't, RTS isn't dead, but I do think it needs an update. I don't think a StarCraft 4 along the same lines as like StarCraft 2 was to Brood War would necessarily be. Oh, well, StarCraft 4 maybe, but StarCraft 3, who knows? StarCraft 4 is just played on our neural implants. I mean, you guys all saw Ready Player One, right? So, and we'll see. Like, I don't know how much of a distinction you make from like single player to multiplayer. And now here is the most feelings poll yet. So, if pessimistic, like, this is a stupid idea, they're wasting people's money, RTS is dead, what are they doing, StarCraft is dead, everything is terrible. If that's a 1, and then like, oh my god, StarCraft 2 gonna have another couple strong years, then we'll transition into Frost Giant Craft, and it's gonna be amazing, and RTS will be the most popular ever, most money-making, bestest game ever. Where are you? 1 to 5. Pessimistic to optimistic. Like, it'll be the new MOBA games. And it'll be MOBA games and Battle Royale together. I think I'm at like, and I think this is a little skewed by me talking to them directly, but I'm probably around where you guys are, like a 3.6, 3.7. Because literally right now there's nothing. There's gonna be this announcement, and then you'll get a trickle of information from people like me on a semi-regular basis, like we're talking monthly or like quarterly. And then in like a year you'll be like, oh yeah, remember, like, and so we'll see if that helps or hurts. But that is what it's going to be. And this will probably, I'm looking at an interview with the founders. At least Tim and Tim. Artosis is going to have them on the Pylon show alongside Kevin and Ryan as well. And it's a little weird to use a first name basis like that, but like, I've met these people in person and work with them, and it's pretty exciting because I know how hard they worked on things for very little. I mean, they got paid, but for a lot of stuff that they couldn't do at Blizzard, well, now they're no longer under the same restrictions. So I'm happy for them. I'm happy for us. And I think good things could come out of it. And that is all I have to say.